how's it going? It's Adam here with Retro Repairs. Long time no see. Sorry I haven't been able to make a video in a while. I've just been crazy busy with a new job and just keeping busy every weeknight too. So I'm hoping I can whip off a quick little repair here. This is going to be a bit of a refurbishing, I'm hoping, of something I picked up recently. So I bought a bundle of old Nintendo things, and in the box came 1, 2, and 3 NES Advantage controllers. So the NES Advantage controller is really pretty cool. It's basically an arcade joystick. It has your A, B buttons, it has turbo options. You can switch between 1 and 2 players for 2-player games. That allows you to pass the controller back and forth, such as Super Mario Brothers. Ideally, this isn't a great controller for Super Mario Brothers, but we're going to use it to test. So I haven't really done a whole lot with these. I'm going to work on trying to see what's wrong with each one and see what we can do to repair it. So we're going to start with, I'm going to reset the game here. So I'm going to show you what I'm doing here. So we have the controller. You can switch it between player 1 and 2. Each of these has 2 controller ports on it, so you plug up both of them in. It's important to make sure that the switch is on the right spot. So if you have the controller 1 cord plugged into controller 2, then really you need to be player 1 on player 2, if that makes sense. So let's see what we've got here. Player 1, select, no action. Player 2, select. I heard a beep. Alright, so it's allowing me to go up and down with player 2 selected. If I switch it back to player 1, nothing. So evidently I've put the cords on backwards. No, it's not quite. Oh. Interesting, so A actually wound up selecting the game. Let's try it again. So try player 2 again. Nothing. Player 1, nothing. No, I'm not getting anything. So I think the joystick may be a little off on this, to say the least. Oh, there we go. Now I'm getting some selection. So that's player 2. Press start. Alright, so we're into the game. So a light push on the right side doesn't do anything. Go left and it seems to. So joystick's a little sticky. Jump button works. Let's try run. Yeah, I seem to be running. Let's see what happens if I turn on turbo. Turbo seems to work. These also do have a slow mode, but all slow really seems to do is intermittently pause the game. So it's not really built for a game like this, but so far it seems like this actually kind of works. I'm gonna die, and we'll make sure that player 2 works. So since I've hooked it up backwards, I actually have to switch it to player 1. I got nothing now. So on player 1, for some reason A is also pause. So something's wrong with the logic on player 2. So we will probably crack that open and see what we can do with it. Okay, so to get started cracking this guy open, what you'll need to do is first remove the rubber feet that are on the bottom. In my case, they've already been removed. They never came with it. So there should be 4 round ones in each corner. And then you'll have 4, maybe even 6 screws. There's 2 empty screw holes here, so good chance someone tried tinkering with this a bit. So you're going to take those out, but also under these turbo buttons there is, they lift out, and there's a little nut here that holds the board to the casing. That's going to need to come out too. So I'm going to go ahead and get these out. In order to do so, I'm just using a little 10mm socket. I think 3/8 will also fit, but my 3/8 inch socket won't actually get in here. So have to improvise a bit. Okay, so all the screws have been removed, so we're going to work on pulling the board off here. So it should just lift straight up, same with the joystick, and this is what we've got. So we have the board here, which controls the button pushes. These look like the turbo switches right here. These are the potentiometers, which control how fast the turbo kicks in. These are the pads for the A and B button. These are the switches here for something. Start, select, player 1, player 2, right there. This is the slow switch. And this is the joystick. So underneath that joystick, it's really just some capacitive pads, just basically a glorified D-pad. So these will likely need to be cleaned out, as during testing we found that the right direction didn't really work very responsively. So we're going to test that out, and then also going to have to check this board for shorts, as well as check this switch. I have a sneaky suspicion this switch might be starting to go, so we're going to test that as well. So before I go too far into testing the board, I want to check that these plugs work properly. It's possible that there's a bad connection somewhere, or one of the wires is broken, which is causing player 2 not to work. So I'm going to show you what I do. So what you could do, test each of these holes and try and find the pin that lines up, but it's a little bit quicker if you look online and look up the NES controller pinout. So this is what I have here. This particular one compares the NES and SNES controllers, but it works for the same thing. One thing to note is when you look at the plug here, you'll see it's kind of inverse to this. So you just have to invert the colors here. So that means red will be this one here on the right that you're looking at rather than on the left. So I'm going to get this set up and I'm going to show you how I'm going to test them. Okay, so here I have my plugs and I have my board, and you're going to need a multimeter for this. So I've grabbed my multimeter, and you're going to put it on continuity mode, and what that'll do is test to make sure it'll beep when a circuit's completed. So I touch them together and you get a beep like that. Now, one of the problems you may have is you can't, a lot of these multimeter tips, you can't actually fit into the plug that you're trying to test. So you could hold it there and touch all of them and you're not going to get anything. What I'm going to do is put the leg, in this case it's a discharge capacitor, but I'm going to put this leg in there all the way, so that way I can touch the leg and then touch it to the pin that it should correspond to. So in this case, based on the schematic I'm looking at, I have it in the red one, which is the data controller, or sends the data signal. So I'm going to touch both of these red ones to see which one it connects to. So that's there, but not here. So that means this particular plug is player 1. So what I'm going to do is just put a bit of tape on it so that I can identify that later. So now I know the one with the yellow tape is player 1. Just makes it easier, especially when hooking it up or continuing to test them. So I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of these. I'm going to speed up the process a little bit, but I want to make sure that The 5 pins that are actually hooked up in here, you might notice that there's 7 holes. Only 5 of these are hooked up, so I want to make sure that 5 of them are connecting onto the appropriate side. So I've already done the red one. I'm going to do the ground and move from there. Okay, so I've gone ahead and tested them all, and I am getting proper continuity between each of these onto the pins. Now, it is worth noting some of the pins, they're actually bridged between them, the ground in particular, and one of the data pins is. So I'm going to check to see if that's standard. I'm sure the ground is. I'm going to check the wiring on this for the other one. This white one right here connects to this white one by this trace right there, which looks like that's the way it's supposed to be. Any others here? Same thing with this, which is orange. The orange, this trace goes down to here. So the oranges and the whites are supposed to be connected between the two of them. And that's what I got when I was testing them. So to me, this cord seems just fine. Now, the thing that I have my doubts about mainly is this switch. You might recall when we did some testing that it worked for player 1, but it wasn't working for player 2 at all. So I'm going to do a little testing on this switch to see if it works properly and if it's properly switching. Okay, so I'm having a little bit of difficulty actually getting a reading off this. So again, I test my probes and I see that it works. If I complete a circuit here, I have the switch currently turned into, I think, 2-player mode. So these pins should connect. Parts of the contact here. Now I've lost it. I'm just not getting a good connection. So these little solder blobs here are kind of dirty, let's say. So all I'm going to do here is simply reflow them a little bit. It's a pretty easy process. I'm going to show you how it works. So all I'm going to do, grab my soldering iron, clean off the tip a little bit, and I'm just going to lightly touch each of these pins a bit. Let's see how much we can zoom in. I think that's about it. So I'm going to touch each of them just so that the solder melts and then rehardens. And the point of this is it's just going to give me a cleaner surface to contact. Okay. So you want to check when you do something like this, you want to try and check just to make sure that there's no solder bridging, and that is little bits of solder that is bridging between these 2 points, and I don't see any on here. So I'm going to go ahead and try that test again with the multimeter. So this contact in here. So I'm not getting any bridging or any contact. Let's try the top here. Any circuit, sorry. Nothing there. I'm going to try switch it into 1-player mode and try that same test. So normally, how this switch should work, it's a 6-point switch here. See, there's 6 solder points. What it should be doing is when you slide the switch over this way, it connects these 2 points. When you slide it over here, it connects these 2. And same thing on the bottom. And that's clearly not happening, so I suspect that this switch is damaged, actually. Or at the very least, not working well. So what I'm going to do is try and remove this switch here. I'm going to show you how quickly. So a very brief desoldering tutorial. So what you're going to want is some flux. I use a flux pen, rosin flux pen. You're going to need some new solder and a soldering braid. So what I like to do for desoldering, get yourself some fresh braids. So cut off any bits that have solder on it right now. Take your flux pen and put a bunch of flux on the braid itself, and this helps to wick the solder in. There. I also like to put some flux on these points. Then all you're going to do is lay your braid flat on the solder points and push into it with your soldering iron. And the solder should just wick straight up into the braid. When you're doing this, just one thing to be careful of is firstly the fumes. Since the solder we're using does have lead in it, you really don't want to breathe it in. You can set up a little fan off in the corner to blow the fumes away. Industrial setups will have actual fume extractors there, so that it's basically like a range hood. It'll suck all the fumes straight up out and get them away, but you can make do just by blowing them away from you. Okay, so that I think is mostly good. What you want to do now, just take something small and just try and wiggle these pins a bit to try and detach them from any residual solder. Anything that doesn't really move, you may have to go back and try and do it just a bit more. I think a couple of these I'm going to need to hit again. Yeah, definitely. Okay, so let's try that again. All right, that's moving. That's moving. Movement, 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 and movement. So now we just should be able to lift this clean off. Sometimes you just have to kind of play with it a little bit, give it a bit of a wiggle. There may still be solder connecting some of it. In this case, actually, these little pins at the bottom are twisted, so you may want to grab some pliers, just try and straighten those out a bit. So as you can see, it's moving, and there we go. So completely removed from the board. Now, before we go any further and try and troubleshoot that switch, what I want to do is clean up the rest of this. So I'm going to put a little more flux on there, get some fresh desoldering braid, and just clean up any remaining solder that's left on these pads. You want to try and leave them nice and smooth with nice big holes so that you can reinsert that switch. Perfect. And when you're done, clean it up with alcohol. I actually didn't grab my alcohol, so I have to go get that. So all you do, Q-tip. I like to use 99% alcohol. You can buy that at most corner stores. I understand some areas won't sell 99%, in which case you can use 70 or 66 if necessary. But the less water you're introducing, always the better. So try and just clean off any residual flux. The point of that is flux will corrode over time, so you don't want to create some early corrosion on here. So clean that up nicely, and that should be good. So now we're going to look at that switch. I'm going to put this off to the side. Okay, so here we have the switch. I'm going to try and focus as well as I can here for you. So as you can see, there are 6 contacts on here, and there's some little black tabs on the side, and that holds this down. I've already bent them up, so this will just lift right up, but what you will need to grab something small to pry it up. And now we're looking at what we have here. So as you can see, the switch has contacts, which is supposed to connect 2 out of the 3 on each side of this switch when you move it, and it wasn't happening. So when we did try and slide it over, you just weren't getting a connection. And I suspect it's due to a buildup of basically just oxidation on these contacts here. You see how the sides are shiny, but the tops are dull? All we're going to do here is just try and brush them up a little bit. So I'm going to grab I have a little bit of sandpaper I'm going to use, and then clean it up with some alcohol. Okay, so the sandpaper I have, this is 1500 grit sandpaper, and it's used for automotive paint jobs, basically. So it's used to smooth out imperfections in the metal. Also, they use higher grades of it to smooth out clear coats as well. So you see when I've hit that, it's already getting a lot shinier. So we're just going to go through it, give it some good work between it, just so that we're getting shiny metal on all sides of it. There, I would say that looks pretty good. So I'm going to do the same thing to this slide part here. So lift it out. This already looks pretty shiny, but just give it a good once over just for just to be sure. Make sure that we don't lose these bits. And now give it a bit of a clean. So again, using the isopropyl alcohol, get a Q-tip and clean all those contacts. So we're going to do right here, wipe them down nicely, wipe these ones off. Again, be careful that they don't go flying off, because you can't really afford to lose these. Otherwise, you're going to buy a new switch. And they're not going to be expensive, but you have to wait for it to come in and all that. Okay, so let that dry a little bit and start putting it back together. So now we're going to test this switch. So if it's working properly, I should get continuity in this position between this contact and this one. So let's check it out. So I am. We'll try the other side as well. Perfect. Now let's try flipping the switch, and the same thing on this side. I'm not getting as good connection. Let's try the other one here. Okay. So I wonder if there's an issue. I'm just going to clean this a little bit. Sometimes there's just junk built up on these pins, and we'll try this side again. So I am not getting continuity here. Okay, so I'm going to have to pull it apart and find out why. Okay, so I have this apart, and what I'm going to do is test continuity from the top of this to the bottom of the pins. So that one's fine. Sorry, it's going to be fuzzy here for a second. I think this is just too small to focus in on. Maybe. Middle's fine. And that's fine. So, continuity is not the problem here. I think that possibly one of two things. Either these pins here in the slide part just weren't properly aligned, or I didn't have it put together tight enough. So I'm going to try reassemble this again. Okay, so it's together. We're checking here that there's no gaps between this little piece of board and the metal housing, which it doesn't look like there is. Making sure that it's still switching, and we're going to test it one more time. Okay, switch it. Oops. So that looks like it's good now. So the switch has been repaired. Now we're going to solder it back into place on the board. So soldering it on is pretty easy, actually. What we're going to do, this particular part, it doesn't matter which direction it goes in, as it serves the same purpose either way. So we're going to push it in all the way onto the board. And then on the bottom side here, we'll remember that these little pins here were twisted. So I'm going to grab, these are actually just some old, cheap, crappy side cutters. I'd recommend using needle nose pliers, but they do the trick, and I'm not worried about really dulling them. So we're going to twist those parts just so that it holds into place. Apply a little bit of flux. And the flux helps, again, just kind of clean that and help it to take solder better. And then I'm going to tin my tip and solder this into place. So let's heat this up, or there we go, we're as zoomed in as possible. Focus it a bit more. So we're going to heat up the pin and the pad simultaneously, drop some solder in, move on to the next one. So if you've done this properly and you've used flux, you shouldn't have really any solder bridging, as it should, the solder will want to move into the hot areas. So looking at that, it stays on those pads pretty well. It looks like we are good. So I'm going to clean it up again with some alcohol. And we're good. So, do one final test after soldering it. So I've got it switched into the player 1 mode. Should have continuity here. Should have it here. If I switch it into player 2, I should have it here. Oops. Why don't I? So it looks like I still have that same kind of problem. So it must really not like something about this switch. I get sometimes just a little bit. Oh. There we go. So this switch is still giving me some problems, so I think I'm going to need to actually replace this switch. Because what this switch does is it changes which of these controller ports to send the signal out to. And if it doesn't know where to send the signal, it's going to exhibit some problems. So I'm just going to try reflow this just to make sure nothing strange is going on. But crap. So that switch still giving me problems. So I'm gonna try get another switch and see if we can get around this here. Alright, so I've gone ahead and rebuilt this switch here one more time. I think the issue was just there wasn't enough pressure down on the slider part to make connection here. So when I test now, get a solid connection, flip the switch the other way, and a solid connection. So it looks like this switch is good. So what I'm going to do now is kind of lightly throw this all back together, and I'm going to test it out. Okay, so we've got it hooked up. I'm going to show you the hookup here. So remember we put that piece of tape on controller number 1, so that way we know that it's in the right spot. I have it all put together here. I didn't fill in everything like these little turbo covers, but it should in theory work. So let's see what we got here. So 1-player game. Start. So far so good. So I can move right. The right's still a little sticky, so I'm gonna have to go back and fix that. I can jump. I can run. And I'm dead. So now we're gonna switch it to player 2. Well, I did a 1-player game, so actually let's restart this. Start, or player 1, sorry. And we'll do 2-player game. So again, we're on player 1 for 1 player. Come on, there we go. And we'll just die. And player 2. And look at that. It works. Everything seems to work. Let's go this way. Let's try turn on turbo. Seems to work. Turn off turbo. Slow. This should make it start and stop. It doesn't seem to like slow on 2-player. Could just be the game. But I can only pause player 1. I don't remember offhand if that's the case with this, but anyways, slow seems to work. Let's try, see if we can crank the turbo all the way down. Turn it up a bit. Turbo doesn't seem to be doing anything right now. So I may have to check on these switches, but we're going to clean up this joystick and give it a thorough testing after that. But definitely looks like we're in the right direction here. Okay, so last part of refurbishing this is going to be just making sure that these pads are nice and clean. And especially here, because this is the joystick part. So as I remember when testing it, the right direction wasn't really working very well. So when this is sitting in place on the joystick. I believe it sits like this, so that means this pad was not working very well. So what you need to do is take this plastic cover off. There's two little clips on the side here, so you can bend them over and then just peel the, there we go, peel this plastic part off. This is really very simple. It's just like any other controller, just it has a big joystick on top of this D-pad. It's not like the new controllers where you actually get full analog motion. There's nothing analog about this. It's a digital 4-way D-pad. So all I do here, alcohol, Q-tip, give it a solid wipe down. I believe, yeah. So you can see that it's coming off kind of dirty. Just keep wiping each of them down until everything comes away clean. That one especially. So definitely picked up a bunch of oxidation on these. Wipe it again with the dry side. It's coming away pretty clean, so I think this is going to be okay. Now the other side is going to be these pads. We need to take each of these pads off. Again, I'm going to give it a bit of a wipe with some rubbing alcohol. And then I put it pad side down against some paper and just rub off a thin layer of this pad here. It's never going to come completely clean. It's always going to leave a bit of a mark, but we just want to kind of smooth it all down. Make sure that you're getting really good contact on the actual circuitry of the board. Alright, then simply reassemble and give it a test. We want to see that we're getting an easy connection whenever we hit that joystick in any particular direction, that it's going the way that we want it to. So again, reassembly should be pretty straightforward. Just snap it together like that. Tilt it over, make sure that these pads look like they're working properly, and then we'll put it back together and try it out again. Actually, before I put it together, I'm going to do the same thing to these pads here. So that's the start, the select, and then the A and B buttons. So just giving it a thorough wipe down. Over time, these just build up grime and dirt and other stuff that really doesn't need to be on there. Okay, so let's put that back into place and we'll try it out one more time. Okay, so just giving a quick little demo. Seems to work great. Selecting, we're going to do a 2-player game. And again, yellow is in the first player. I'm going to push right, and that works pretty well. Left works pretty well. Oops. So I have turbo turned on. It seems to be working. I'm going to turn down the speed of turbo, see how much of an effect that actually has. There we go. Slowed down a bit. Turn turbo off. There we go. So I'm going to go ahead and die. Then we're going to put it onto player 2. And look at that. We are in action. If I put it to player 1 quickly, I shouldn't be able to do anything. but I can start it, or pause it. But player 2 is the one you need to go to actually control it. There we go. And I can run, so yeah, it definitely looks like this is working. So the last part of this, turn the TV off. So the last part of this is I'm just going to clean up the shell and the buttons of this. So I'm going to give it a good soak, I'm going to give it a good wipe down, and hopefully make this look almost brand new. It's actually in pretty good shape. Not even a lot of wear on this logo here, a little bit on the Nintendo part, but just clean it up overall. Maybe I'll try and go to a craft store or something and see if I can find some new rubber feet to go over here, but otherwise this is done. So I'm gonna clean this up. I'm not gonna film it. You've seen me clean up a lot of consoles and controllers already, so once that's done, I'll show you the result. So next, grab your A and your B button. Doesn't matter which one, they both are the exact same size. And put them into place. There's only one way they'll really fit properly. There's these little notches and they slide right into there so they don't rotate. Start and select are, let's see, these guys right here. So there are two different types of buttons. One of them has no notch in it and one of them has a notch here. So the ones with notches are going to be your start, I stand corrected. They're going to be your turbo buttons. And then your start and select are the ones without notches. The last one with the notch is going to be down here, and this is the slow button. And then this guy is your slider, and that's going to go right there. I've put a little piece of paper in here just to add some additional pressure down on that switch so that it doesn't let go in the future as easily. Lastly, you're going to put your capacitive pads into place. Conductive pads, sorry. So they go on top of A, B, start, and select. Just like so. So now that that's done, time to grab your board and slide it into place. So flip it over so that you don't see any of the pads. The hole at the top here is going to go right over top of this post. Kind of wiggle it around so that everything fits nicely. You may need to flip the 1 and 2 player switch until everything lines up just right. Your D-pad, rotate your joystick until it sits nicely, and D-pad's going right there. I like to tack this into place using 2 of the small black screws. I'm not super worried about tightening it all the way. Just get it there to hold nicely. Then you're going to want to grab this little piece that looks like a cross. Now this is going to sit right here with the long part going down into the corner here. You're going to use your long brass screws for these 3 screw holes. And you may as well just screw this down into place. All right. This last part to install is this little grounding post, and this goes right here. It sits over top of this post, which holds the bottom of the casing into place, and we're going to screw that in. Now the rest of it is 4 more black screws. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are going there, 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 and there. Okay, last part under here, you're going to take your cord, loop it over, and tuck the strain relief right into this little notch in the housing right there. So it should sit just like that. Flip it over, and now you got to put the nuts back in here. So you're going to need a washer and a nut for each of these. And then using your socket, again, I'm using a 10mm socket here. I just tighten that up nicely. You don't have to really overdo it. You just want to hold these into place. Cool. Now, what I like to do, turn these all the way down, so all the way to the left, and then you install the knobs here. That way I can line up this little marker exactly with this arrow right here. Then you push it into place. Nice, that actually might be not far enough. There we go. So those are nice and straight. Last thing you're going to do is screw on the bottom plate. So the bottom plate has this little notch or little piece of metal right here, and this is supposed to go over top of the D-pad. The point of it is to prevent you from putting too much strain on that D-pad and breaking it. So you're going to have 6 screws to put in, and I've borrowed 2 from another pad, as if you recall, I was missing the middle 2 screws. And there we go. So that is a refurbished NES Advantage. Wasn't overly difficult to fix, as I said, as we kind of indicated. The problem here was that 1-2 player switch, which caused me problems when switching between 1 and 2 player, obviously. So luckily that ended up being not too difficult, and we got ourselves a nice working joystick in pretty good condition. So that's it for this video. I'm going to try and tackle some other stuff pretty soon, so hopefully I can get another video up not too long from now. But thanks a lot for your patience and waiting for me to get another video going. I apologize for the delays, but I've just been super busy this summer. Thanks a lot for watching. Be sure to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Leave me a comment below. Let me know what you think, and let me know what you want to see in the future. I'll see what I can do to make that happen. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you next time.